our behaviour change model is to take 1 year off flying. So it doesn't say you can never fly again. It doesn't even say that flying is bad necessarily. It's just how can we reduce the amount we fly because we are at the point where we need to be slashing our emissions. So I'm going to start by talking about why flying is something that we should be considering and why our campaign asks people to take that year off. So first of all, for the climate. Emissions from flights are pretty much the highest of any mode of transport. So if we're comparing to travelling by car, travelling by coach, if we can come down kind of through the transport modes and the emissions get less and less as we go. So flights are at the top, then driving and flying are kind of equal if there's only one person in the car, but the difference is the distances you travel by plane are likely to be a lot higher than if you're driving. So yeah, we've got plane, we've got driving, we've got coach travel. So coach travel is actually quite low compared to flying, and especially compared to driving as well. We've got domestic train travel. So here in the UK, we have a mixture of electric trains, we have a mixture of diesel trains. So our trains can be, you're probably saving about 6 times your savings of carbon are about 60% if you're travelling by train. If you're travelling internationally by train, then it's really, really high, the savings. So you can save about 90% on your emissions by taking a train across the continent. That's because it's super green electricity that powers those trains. So we're kind of going down in the hierarchy of those transport modes. And it takes a huge amount of fossil fuel, kerosene, to get those planes in the air. They're just incredibly heavy and they go very fast and huge distances. So there's very little else you might be doing in your life that raises your carbon footprint quite so much and so quickly as taking a flight. And comparing that as well to our other lifestyle choices. So a lot of the things we're learning about this weekend are growing your own, how can you save energy at home? How can you reduce in your daily transport? What about the clothes you wear? How all these things can help you reduce your carbon footprint. But actually, those savings that you make, even over, let's say, the course of a year, for example, if you decided to leave your car on the drive for an entire year, all the savings that you would make in that year could be wiped out just by one flight. Depending on where you fly, of course. So yeah, it's kind of the high end of our carbon footprints. So reducing that on an individual level, it makes so much of a difference to us as individuals. And when we add all those individual actions together, that's when we can make a difference. And that's when we can make those huge reductions that we need to see. There has been recently the report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has really driven it home that climate-wise, we need to be taking much more action than we currently are. When it comes to our government policy, they're perhaps lagging, not perhaps, definitely. And so it can therefore be, the actions that we take as individuals are really powerful, which brings me on to the second point. So flight free for the climate, flight free for social and system change. So it's not just our individual actions. So we ask people to take a flight-free year, but we don't just say, take your flight-free year and then just don't tell anybody about it and just kind of stay quiet. It's about telling people that you're doing this, because if lots of people do this together, and we have a counter on our website which shows how many people have made this pledge. If lots of us do this together, that is when we make a difference in terms of reducing our emissions and in terms of changing the social picture around aviation. So let's talk about social change. Many of us have kind of grown used to cheap flights. The last 30 years, we've had a lot of budget airlines come through, and that's just become the default way to travel for holidays and etc. So it becomes, okay, where should we go? Let's go to Berlin. Great, I'll look at the flights. And that's the extent of the conversation. We kind of forget that there are other ways to travel. And so, for example, actually recently we had a comment on our Facebook page saying, I literally didn't know you could take a train to Germany. And yeah, of course you can. We just don't consider these things because most people don't do that. So yeah, that's how we kind of change that social conversation, change that social norm by enough people just raising the question of, oh, maybe we shouldn't necessarily default travel in this way. There are other ways to do it. And we're really influenced by each other. So one of the reasons why everybody flies is because everybody flies. And I say that like this because only half of Brits fly in any given year. Lots of us don't. But yeah, if you're in a friendship group of people who do, then you just think everybody does, because that seems to be the normal thing to do. Okay, and that also leads to system change. So it's not just amongst us and kind of changing the norm and the conversation. It's about influencing those in power. So we're talking about the government, we're talking about industry. Now, at the moment, Boris Johnson is preparing for the COP climate conference in Glasgow, and he's doing this by asking other countries to make really huge climate commitments and saying that the UK is a leader in climate action. But at the same time, some of the policy is to continue to expand airports and to encourage people to fly more, because that's how we're going to develop our green technology that will then reduce emissions from aviation. So it's a bit of a strange one when you hear government ministers saying, if we fly more, it will reduce emissions. That's mathematically not possible. So this is where we, as individuals, we can say, right, our government isn't taking the necessary action, so it's up to us. We can take the necessary action. And if we do that, we can say, actually, Boris, we're not happy with the way things are. We want things to change. And that's when, in terms of politics, politicians like to win votes, of course. And if you show by your actions that this is the kind of thing I'm keen on, this is the kind of action I would like to see, and that would, if we could have policy that would enable me to take this action, then that's the kind of thing I'm going to vote for. That's when it comes into the system change. So, final thing about why, and then I'll get on to the fun part. The final thing about why is justice. So climate justice is a really, really serious conversation. Across the world, people are living with the effects of climate change, and they have been for decades now. And it's an injustice that they're the people who are typically suffering the most now, and historically have done the least to cause climate change. So they have the lowest carbon lifestyles, and they live in the lowest carbon countries, yet we here are the ones who are causing climate change, but we are seeing the effects less. We're seeing the effects now, of course. We are seeing more frequent weather events, such as flooding and wildfires. We're seeing crops failing. Those are the types of things that would just continue to get worse, but they're the things that have been seen in other countries for so long as a result of our high carbon lifestyles. And this is where it's a massive global injustice. And these things kind of feed down into things like offsetting. So I can talk about offsetting a bit more in depth later in the questions section if you want to hear a bit more about that. But just briefly, if we are saying, well, I would like to buy an offset so I can continue to fly, and with the offset money, that will encourage a community in a country in Africa to reduce the amount of carbon they emit through, funding cook stove projects. Well, that doesn't quite seem fair either. Surely we, as the ones with our high carbon output, should be the ones reducing, because it's a global injustice that climate change is happening to those who have done least to cause it. And on a local basis as well, in terms of justice. So, as I said, we have only about half of people in the UK fly in any given year, yet we all suffer the consequences of dirty air and airport noise and those kinds of things, and rising emissions, of course. So it's something that really we need to quite soon and quite urgently redress that balance for those reasons. But coming on to the fun part, so I want to talk about travel. Now, not flying doesn't mean not travelling, and as we mentioned in the introduction, I haven't been on a plane for more than 10 years, but I'm still very well travelled. Like that lady who put on our Facebook page, I didn't know you could get to Germany without flying. Well, of course you can. It's a train journey that you would probably change in Brussels. So you would get from here, it's quite easy. We can access London quite quickly and access the Eurostar quite quickly. The Eurostar is such an adventure. You're going underneath the channel, and it's a lovely, comfortable train, coming into Brussels and then changing onto another train over to Hamburg. Maybe a night train. maybe sleeping on the train, maybe a hotel on wheels. These are the types of things that are actually so much more of an enjoyable experience than being on a flight. So the thing about flight-free travel is that the journey is as much a part of the adventure and the holiday as the actually getting there. So with Europe, we're so lucky. We have a really good train network. It could be much better, and there are policies and governments across Europe who are trying to reintroduce night trains. They have progressive policies in terms of, let's remove this flight route because there is a train that can make that journey in less than 2.5 hours. That's one of the policies from the French government. And this all says that the experience of doing that is a much more enriching one for the traveller. So 4 or 5 years ago, I went to Copenhagen, and it was a journey that perhaps it would have taken a couple of hours by air. Obviously, it would have taken longer in real life, and that's what in reality, and that's one of the things we have to think through. So yes, it does look that the rail journey would take so much longer than the flight, and in many cases that's true, but don't forget that with a short haul flight, you're at least doubling the flight time when you consider getting to the airport and checking in and baggage claim and all those kinds of things at the end. So time comparison is not vastly different. Although the journey to Copenhagen, it did take more than a day. But those were 2 days or a day and a half of real adventure and excitement. And not just that, it was relaxing. And it was a lesson in geography, and it was a cultural experience as well. So not just seeing how the landscape evolves as you travel across Europe. Copenhagen's quite similar in terms of geology, I guess, I don't know if that's the right word, to the UK. But going south, like if I were to go to Malaga, for example, seeing the landscape gradually changing, just get more hot and a bit more arid as you go through Spain, those are the kinds of things that you miss when you're on a flight. So seeing how everything connects, it's a geography lesson, and it gives us a picture of our place in the world. Culturally as well, because everything is connected, if you're on a train, you hear the language of the countries that you're going through. And as people get on and off the train, it kind of steadily morphs. And on this Copenhagen trip, it was obviously in the UK to France, and then to Belgium, and then into Germany. And the language you can hear around just changes, and then into Denmark. On that occasion, the train went on a ferry. It was the most exciting moment of the trip. It completely blew my mind. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen anymore. That particular route now goes overland, the long way around through Germany. But if you are interested in taking a train on a ferry, there is one still left in Europe, which goes from across the Strait of Medina in Italy, along the foot of it, at the very toe of Italy into Sicily. So if you would like that extremely unique experience, maybe that's someone who's already done it, then seeing a train roll its way onto a ferry and then go across the sea is quite an exciting experience. But these are the things that we gain when we travel over land. The possibilities are kind of endless. I mean, with Europe, a combination of train and boat will get you to most places within a couple of days. And yeah, as I've said, that's part of your holiday. Even if you only have a week's holiday, you're still on the beach for 3 days. If you are trying to go further afield, then there are other options as well. And of course, it will take longer. But these are the kind of choices that we are faced with. If we do want to travel in a low carbon way, then we are probably, it's realistic that we look close to home for most of our journeys, and then if we have the desire to go, for example, to China, you can take a train to China. It will probably take a couple of weeks, but that is also a complete, adventure of a lifetime, and it's something that you would dine out on for the rest of your life. I'm going to just share with you a couple of stories from our campaign. So there are a few people who've signed up to our pledge who have done these kind of long, inspiring journeys. One of them, that train journey to China I mentioned. So a guy, Roger Tyers, so he's a researcher for a university, and he was doing a project about people's reactions to climate change, and he decided that To get to China, of course, the easiest and cheapest way would be to fly, and that was the way that his university expected him to travel, but he said, I would make so much more of an impact if I got there without flying. Also, he took, for the return journey, he could take that 2 weeks and use it to write up his notes, and it would, it wouldn't be wasted time, it would be useful time and work time. So that's what he decided to do. And so travel part aside, back to kind of the social change side, when someone is as convinced about their actions as that, and to demonstrate with their actions that they believe that climate change is enough of a problem to actually bother to go to China by train, that's when you really take them seriously. So something that Greta Tunberg, who famously sailed across the Atlantic a couple of years ago, she said it wasn't just about the fact that she didn't fly. She says, when you don't fly, not only do you reduce your own emissions, you also send a signal that climate change is real. And I think that's really important, especially those of us who are in leadership positions. Anyway, so that is China by train. There's also a really inspiring story of a cyclist close to my own heart, because I'm a touring cyclist as well, a lady called Kate Rawls, who did a journey from up the Rockies. Oh no, she's done two. Okay, this was the Andes, right? She's done the Rockies, she's done the Andes. When she did the Andes trip, she went from the top of the range, which I think is in Panama, correct me if I'm wrong, all the way down to the very tip of Cape Horn in Cape of Good Hope. No, Cape Horn, it is Cape Horn, isn't it, at the bottom of Chile. She would know this, obviously, she's been there, I haven't. This was a biodiversity awareness raising ride. So she does long bike rides to kind of raise awareness of these global issues. And she went by cargo ship. And that is an adventure of a lifetime. And it's obviously something, it's not accessible to everybody. It is an expensive way to travel, and it takes a long time. She was on that ship for about a month. But she... she's given herself a flight ration, so she doesn't not fly anymore. She just flies kind of once every 5 years, and that's fine. So on this occasion, it was the journey across the ocean. And yeah, being on a cargo ship in the middle of the ocean, it's a unique experience that you just wouldn't get anywhere else. And being that far from human habitation and seeing the stars and feeling the weather just slowly get, across the equator, and just absolutely amazing, something that you'll never forget. And in terms of emissions, on a per passenger basis, travelling to South America by cargo ship was 40 times less polluting than flying. So for her, it just made perfect sense to do that. So a bit of short haul, a bit of long haul. There are huge numbers of equally inspiring stories on our website that we share. So the campaign I run is Flight Free UK, and the website is flightfree.co.uk. I have these flyers which are on your chairs, and as I said, it's 1 year of flying that we ask people to take. Could you be flight free in 2022? So we're already collecting pledges for 2022. And on the back, it explains a little bit about behaviour change and about how what we are trying to achieve with this in terms of influencing each other and those kinds of things, and just changing the norm around aviation. I've spoken for 20 minutes. I'll be really happy to take some questions if you have any.
Thank you so much. Who would like to?